Mike actually asked me, since we're running shockingly on schedule. I mean, this never happens. You know, this is like a first. He actually asked me to run long, and of course I take great pride in finishing it within 10 seconds of my allotted time. But so I guess I'll slow this from a sprint to kind of a jaunt, and I actually threw in some bonus stuff at the end that kind of carries on with the story that Eric was telling earlier. So let's talk about what I feel like is a really cool new building type for some weird reasons. As I said before, please turn your phones on. The Makerspaces hashtag, and if you want to, I'm at Steve Mouzon. Let's take a look at Make Shop Miami, which was a makerspace that actually started out by a couple of new urbanists, Matt Lambert and Katia Hansen. And they began in an old retail building in Little Havana. It was known originally as the Barrio Workshop. After that, they moved to a place that they shared with another group called Lab Miami. Now that, as you can see, is a new building. It's not the old building they started out in. And so it became too expensive, and so that didn't last for that terribly long. For a little while, they were actually, this was the night of doing the book launch for New Media for Designers and Builders, and at that time, Make Shop was actually in the combination of the cloth awning you see there and the storage container behind, and it was in a skate park. So that was their third location. They had a brief period of time, actually it was only a weekend, in something known as Purple Line in Miami. That's where they're basically saying there should be a transit stop here. There isn't, and it should be on the Purple Line, which should run from here to here. And so for that weekend, Make Shop was actually under an overpass. Well, not this overpass, but it was one I had a picture of. So anyhow, and at this point, Make Shop is actually in storage containers somewhere in Tennessee. So it's a very nomadic existence, and we'll see where they land next. But I'm confident that it's going to be somewhere cool. So when you look at all that, you say, well, wait a minute now. What is it that the makers actually need? All you've told me is that they need a large space, it needs to be open, it needs to be cheap. Well, that could be anything almost that meets those three criteria. So I can just say, we'll see you later, I'm done. Right? You know, well, actually, it's not quite that, but if you look at just the building type itself, then that is the case. It's not a very demanding building type between, beyond being large and open and cheap. But let's think a little bit more about the makers and what it is that they actually do, and then that might inform a few things. One of the things that they do is they recover a number of old crafts. Now, it can be anything from sewing and cooking to metalwork and plastering and woodworking of various sorts. To in my hometown of Huntsville, Alabama, where I originally live, known as Rocket City, USA, there's actually a lot of rocket scientists having they're launching on rockets and stuff. And so it really all depends on who the makers are in the place. They may be building robots or these 3D printers or all this. But so they're recovering old crafts or crafts that are largely old, but they're also doing new stuff with them. They're not just learning to do it like their grandparents did, but they're actually doing new things. And so part of it is, you might say it's like a school where they're trying to learn. They'll have people come in and do lectures and this sort of thing to try to relearn this old craft. But then part of it is laboratory as well. So they're not only learning, but they're also testing. And say, what can we do with this now that our grandparents didn't do? And so it's both learning and doing, not just one or the other. And another way of putting it, it is to say that in order to make, you must first learn. You can't just show up and just automatically do something. Now, one thing you'll notice if you hang out in most maker spaces, and that is that a lot of the technology they're using is really old. They're using stuff from maybe the 1970s and 1980s. With Make Shop, I actually dumped 20 years worth of computer cables and other gizmos on them recently when I was kind of clearing out my office for the first time in that long. and they loved it. It's like, wow, you won't believe what all we can do with this stuff that I had no further use for, you know. But the key is, if it's old and cheap, it's kind of hard to see, that's Walmart and the horse-drawn buggy. But anyhow, if it's old and cheap, then that actually makes it very accessible, you know, as opposed to the latest technology, which you have to spend a lot of money on. Not all the makers are Gen X or Gen Y, but it's dominated by younger people. Most of them are younger than me, not older, let me put it that way. And it focuses also not only on old and cheap, but also what you call hacks and cracks. And this is maker speak for a conference call, okay? Turn two phones head to tail, and the two people can talk to each other. And you know, it's figuring out cheap and quick and dirty and easy ways of doing stuff without necessarily you know, breaking the bank. Now, the American view, I say public view here, but it's actually the American view of innovation, or largely American, is that innovation is actually something that is, first of all, high budget. And very high tech, and then it's got to be done by the corporations. I mean, I'm a huge Mac fan. This is nothing against Apple, but I mean, Apple is kind of they're kind of the icon of innovation today in a lot of circles, and of course that depends on large power structures as well. Maker innovation, on the other hand, is almost exactly the opposite on almost every count. It's first of all low budget, very often low tech. And instead of being corporate, it's actually personal. And instead of depending on the large power structures, actually what happens is it actually removes the need for some of the outside power structures, because it's letting you do stuff by yourself that you never thought you could do. You know, it's all these different things that you're making that you always just assume that some big company would do for you before that time. So let's talk about inventiveness for a little bit. And what it's actually composed of. Inventiveness is the product of something that sparks something in your mind. If there's not a new idea in your mind, you don't invent anything. You just do the same old thing, and that's okay. Production work is okay, but because makerspace is part laboratory, then they actually have to think about you know, new things that haven't been invented yet, and also some of the things that will spark the mind. First of all, is a chance meeting with someone you didn't plan to see that day. You know, you just kind of happen across them, and this happens best if you're in a place where you have many ways to turn. You know, it's not just like one path from home to office, or from office to lunch, and then back to the office, and then back home again. And where you might actually meet somebody that you did not know theretofore, you know, and they may have some great idea. Because one of the real keys I've found over the years, the most insight-rich zones I've ever found in my own experience are those when I'm able to look at something through the lens of another discipline. In other words, if I'm talking to somebody that's a gardener or whatever, and I'm talking about something having to do with architecture and urbanism, the insights that they will spark in my mind are something that I never would have gotten on my own, because I don't do what they do. Okay, and so the ability to have people, you know, take a turn and end up meeting somebody and look at something through a different lens, that's the basics of inventiveness. And now if you look at from the corporate setting, an innovative corporate setting, it's because corporations are focused on a strict product line. You know, they don't just make everything, they don't just show up and say, what should we make today? You know, I mean, these things are in the works for a long period of time. And so they tend to be inward looking. You know, this is obviously Apple's new headquarters that I guess it's under construction now, I'm not sure. But anyhow, I mean, that's kind of an icon of corporate inventive setting. But an innovative maker setting would be actually exactly the opposite, again, as you might suspect already. First of all, it needs to be connected to a whole lot of things around it. Yeah, it's 3 minutes, but he said to run long, so I'm gonna do that. She's holding up the 3-minute sign. So. Okay. Yeah, and so it, as opposed to looking inward all the time, it has to be an outward-looking setting, and multifaceted. Because one thing about it is that not only do the projects vary from one makerspace to the next, but they might vary from one day to the next. What someone shows up and decides to work on that day might be, you just don't know what that might be. You cannot know that in advance. So that's innovative maker setting. So I would suggest to you that, that there's actually 3 essentials for maker inventiveness. The first one obviously is the workplace itself. But then the second one is what I call the walk space around it. And the third one is actually what you can connect to from that walk space. In other words, you know, whether it's coffee shops or housing that the makers can afford to live in, or whatever it might be, that these third places, chance meetings. Because, you know, part of making stuff is you know, where you test the ideas is actually in the workplace, but where you get the ideas might not actually be in the workplace. Let's quickly take a look at the workplaces themselves. There's a number of different things here I'm going to mention that they need to have. Jane Jacobs was right. It's absolutely essential to have old buildings. They're the only ones that will be cheap enough to actually have a maker space. They should be both wired and wireless. The big utility is electricity. For many reasons. You've got to be careful with codes, because a lot of the maker space, or some of them anyway, around the country have actually been shut down because of being just massively non-compliant with building codes. Let me suggest that you probably ought to have just an open wireless. I mean, why protected? Chances are, if the space is big enough, and if it's in a place that is really not recovering yet, probably nobody's going to be around you to scarf your wireless anyway, so just go ahead and have a wireless system. You need a place for people to both work alone and also together. You need places to meet and to present, which obviously requires movable seating. You need to be able to throw the projector, ideally just up on a wall. No need to really have a screen in most cases. And of course, you need to have a coffee table or meeting table as well, so it can double as a meeting space and a presentation space, kind of like this. You need places for people to be able to write stuff or clip stuff and put it out for others to read. Need places to spray paint, and also places, obviously, to clean up. Thinking about the walk space, there's a lot of actual benefits now that have been documented for, you know, the thinking on your feet thing is not just some euphemism for thinking quickly. It's actually a proven thing that if you're walking, that your brain is activated in ways that it's not if you're sitting. You know, Steve Jobs was famous for his long walks when he was developing new things. I've mentioned this last year, or a year before, I guess it was, at CNU, but I'm going to quickly give you what I feel like is the real mechanics of walkability, and this is something that the makerspace, actually I would suggest to you that their prime responsibility once they actually get in a space is to enhance the walk appeal all around them so that they can connect to more things. You know, for years we've talked about the quarter-mile walk, and like that's the precise number that Americans will walk to. That actually is a myth that is true in one place. If you look, for example, at the Power Center, the yellow dotted line is a quarter-mile walk. People walk much less than a quarter of a mile there. As you can see here, that's about how far they'll walk if they're lucky in the Power Center. Over here in Rome, there's a quarter of a mile. North is this way, so I can fit it on the slide. Vittorio Emanuele is here, and I'm forgetting the name of the piazza. Piazza di Popolo. Yeah, sorry, Piazza di Popolo is here. And people will easily walk that distance to the Vittorio Emanuele and then keep on walking for miles further into the city. I would suggest to you that there's a number of different standards. I'm calling it the London standard. It could be the Rome standard, the Paris standard, whatever. The great European city standard, where people will easily walk 2 miles without even thinking about getting in the car. A good American Main Street, they'll walk 3/4 of a mile without thinking of getting in the car. The neighborhood standard, or the T4 streets, if you will, that's where people will actually walk the quarter mile without thinking about getting in the car. That actually works there. That's that setting. If the suburban standard, where houses that may be good, but they're further back, actually that's the Amityville Horror House, and you can say, well, maybe that's not good. But anyhow, that they're further back and further apart, it's less interesting. They'll walk more like 1/10 of a mile there. In a subdivision, they might only walk 250 feet or less at Levittown. And then in the Power Center, they might walk 100 feet if you're lucky. And then if you have an arterial with parking right behind it, the only reason they'll really walk, I call that 25 feet, but the only reason they'll really walk there is simply if your car breaks down. So how do you enhance the walk appeal? Well, the starting point obviously is to begin tactically. You know, this is not something that is some big funded effort. It's something you do in little bits and pieces, and you must be patient. This is the first fruit of our garden at the Dixon. It shows how little or how much I've forgotten about raising tomatoes since I was a kid and was actually good at it, because that was the very first one, and that's all the further it got. And it also means being lean. Now there's a whole set of, there's an entire lean room around here somewhere. I haven't found it yet, but there's going to be a lot of really cool stuff there. If you have some extra time, be sure to stop and see what the lean folks are doing. There's a lot of talk in traditional architecture circles about tending the flame instead of just worshiping the ashes. Let me suggest to you that the makers of the group, that as much as anybody right now, is not only tending the flame, but they're actually starting fires. So it really, at this point, I think that they may be the best laboratory of actually watching how new traditions actually develop and continue. And they're a great place for also testing new patterns of architecture and urbanism. Okay, so that's the end of my prepared presentation. I'm going to quickly go in here, folder, and just show you some stuff quick. Okay, and these are just, I'm going to just quickly scroll through these just to give you a few more images of, and I'm not going to even say much of anything as I go through, but these are more of the images from the Belize project. This is a single crew workplace, which is one of the essentials of having stuff work in very small increments. It's by day, it's a coffee shop; by night, it's a bar. And just some images from that. Obviously, all of this stuff is as Eric said, there's no insulation anywhere. It's all, it's basically the way the old beach cottages, really all over the U.S. as well, were originally built. You know, you went there in the summertime, not the wintertime, and so you didn't have to worry about insulation. And so, so the idea of having open stud walls was an easy thing to do. And we carve into those open stud walls and actually make every wall a shelving or storage unit of some sort. And so so it's not just charming; it's actually useful as well. Same thing with those curtains. They're not just there just as decoration, but it's actually meant as sun shading at certain times of the day, so that you can have a cool place to sit. That's one under construction. Some others, and they were built modularly. Also, they actually build them on mainland Belize, bring them out, put them together in pieces, all built of sustainably harvested Belizean mahogany. You can see from air as you fly that they actually treat this stuff like they treat the forest like farms. You can see, you know, those trees in that 40 acres are 5 years old. The trees next to it in that 40 are 15 years old, and so forth. A few interior shots of some of the units. Just to give you kind of a feel for those as well. It's the Roman Bee, and then that's the little sales office right next door. One thing, interestingly enough, that happened here, there were four houses. The four houses in the middle were actually done by the developer originally. And then he discovered that people don't like that architecture there. They didn't sell, and they still haven't sold. And so, but I want you to look at some of these images here in a minute and see when the entire town is white, which is actually the best thing to do. That's the best passive way of cooling a place. The whole town is white. Look how those other buildings that are out of character with the new buildings and new out of character with the old, however you want to look at it, how well they fit in. It actually, you don't even hardly notice that they're there unless you look very closely or look straight at them like these shots do. And so without that, you actually don't even pick that up. Getting towards sunset here on this day. And that's the end of that. Actually, I'm going to quickly go through just a few more here that are mainly interior shots. after some sunrise shots. And then a few interior shots of the units, just to give us some visuals. And maybe that's it. Okay, thank you very much.